God's plan kind of come together and complete itself. The tables have turned in favor of the Jewish people, and it's caused them to rejoice and in the streets. And in this session, we're going to see how it, in Esther 8, how it helps us to understand and see the importance of celebrating the salvation of God, which was a gift that was given to each and every one of us. God emerges in in our lives through providence. His providence leads to salvation. And when the activity of God results in the turning of the tables in a situation in our lives, that can always cause for celebration. So in Esther, the tables, I said, the table's been turned. They've been turned for the Jews. They've been turned for Esther. They've been turned for Mordecai. Actually, the entire province. Everything that Haman reached for and lusted for, Mordecai now has. It's been given to him. Not just the property or the position, but Mordecai also has gained the respect of the entire kingdom. He's a foreigner. Now, let me stop there just for a second. Any of you guys that's done foreign mission trips, it's unique how they treat Americans. We're foreigners, but yet they like to flock to us. But many times we don't know what they're saying. What they're really saying. So Mordecai has gained the respect and the authority, and the king has even turned over his signet ring over to Mordecai and Esther, which is like, wow. So Esther, we're going to start chapter 8, start at verse 1, and go from there. The same day, King Xerxes gave Queen Esther the estate of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. And Mordecai came into the presence of the king, for Esther had told her how he was related to her. The king took off his signet ring, which he had reclaimed from Haman, and presented it to Mordecai, and Esther appointed him over Haman's estate. Now, y'all remember what happened to Haman last week? Yeah, he got impaled on the gallows that he built that were intended for Mordecai. So the people are no longer weeping and they're rejoicing. They've neutralized the threat. I think of the Gaza Strip right now. I talk about this stuff and Israel, but they've neutralized the threat, the cause of the threat. They really haven't neutralized the threat itself, because if you remember, before Haman was put to death, he enabled or enacted a decree that basically the entire Jewish nation would be eliminated. So there's still that problem, and it's still out there, and something's got to be done for it, and it's almost time for that decree to be implemented. And they have to do something, and they have to do something fast, or it's going to get ugly really fast. Some of you guys watch football. How many times have you seen a guy run a kickoff back or a punt back, and he gets on about the 1 yard line, he drops the ball, and somebody picks it up and runs the other way and scores a touchdown for the other team? I mean, how many times does that have to happen before you really realize, I'm not going to drop this football until I'm back in the locker room, But it happens all the time. And so often we tend to stop at what we think might be a victory, and we stop trusting God as just being enough. But even when it comes to spiritual warfare, we get through a trial, and God delivers us through a trial, and then when it's done, it's over, we feel like the threat has been neutralized. Okay, God, you can go back on the shelf again, and when I need you, I'll give you a shout. Is that honestly, when y'all understand that, right? I know I do that. I've done that. And it's tough. We have to deal with what's left behind sometimes, but we have to remember the fight and who fought the fight for us. So Mordecai, he's now told the king who Esther really is. He tells him of his relationship to Esther, and the king gives Queen Esther the house that Haman used to live in. And who was the enemy of the Jews. And Esther appoints Mordecai to be over the house of the man that hated him, that was trying to get him killed. But because the fruit of Haman's evil work is not dealt with, Esther still has a heavy burden, and she knows we have to do something about this decree that's out there. She's still carrying this concern for those who might be impacted by this rule, this law, if they don't take any action. And as long as the threat is still out there, she just can't carry on like nothing's going on, especially with her people still in danger. So this is the responsibility of those who have received salvation from the Lord as well, which includes us. It's not enough to rest in the understanding of our own station in life, but we're called to carry a burden and concern for those who haven't found that salvation yet. Because sometimes we're like, I gave my life to Christ, I got baptized, I'm good, it's done, I'm just waiting to be called up to heaven. No, our concern should be as Esther's concerned. Those people out there are going to die if we don't do something quickly. And that's why Jesus tells us to go to the hedges and the highways and compel them to come in. Luke 14:3, the master told his servant, go out to the roads and country lanes and compel them to come in so that my house will be full. And he tells us in Matthew 28:19-20, go and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father. We know that very well, but we just we only pull that verse out when we get ready for a mission trip sometimes. We don't realize that our mission trip is everywhere we go. The post office, the grocery store, the gas station, the gym. That is our mission field, guys. And we need to have a burden for people that are right here in our own community, in our family. How many of y'all have people in your family that maybe you're not sure exactly if they're going to walk through the gates of heaven? Anybody here? Probably all of us. And we need to have that burden. Go ahead. Yeah. Yeah, it's funny you said that, because I'm spinning something off of this starting Sunday morning about I'm Christian-ish, so just enough to be comfortable. So I won't go into that. But anyway, we're held to this standard of the greatest commandment, Mark 12:28-30. I'm skipping around a little bit after I got them up here. One of the teachers of the law came and heard them debating. Noticing that Jesus had given them a good answer, he asked him, of all the commandments, which one is most important? The most important one, answered Jesus, is this: Hear, O Israel. Anytime you hear, O Israel, or woe to you, or whatever, that's important. The Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. The second is this: love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. Love your neighbor. So we cannot just be satisfied with our own personal salvation. And we tend to do that while others around us are suffering. And we just do not have the luxury of being a solo success. So back to Esther, verse 7. King Xerxes replied to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew. This is where it's going to be testing our own honesty here a little bit. So because Haman attacked the Jews, now this is the king talking to Queen Esther. Because Haman attacked the Jews, I've given his estate to Esther, and they have impaled him on the pole he set up. Now, here we go. Write another decree in the king's name in behalf of the Jews, as seems best to you, and seal it with the king's signet ring, which makes it official. It's like getting it notarized. For no document written in the king's name and sealed with his ring can be revoked. So, the king is like, hey, I gave you the house of Haman, number one. He was hanged on the gallows because of what he tried to do to you guys. So now you write a decree concerning the Jews. You can seal it, and whatever is written and sealed with my ring cannot be revoked. That's a pretty good deal. I mean, you don't get much better than that. And I think it's important to note that the king is falling into a very dangerous pattern right here because he's giving away some of his power as being the king. And he's allowing others to stamp their desires with his power attached to it. And this time it's not Haman, but it's Mordecai and Esther. And Esther and Mordecai developed their own decree. So before we get into that, what would you write if you were them? I want you to put your place in their position. You're writing a decree to override a decree of a man that was trying to kill you. And all your people, your family, say. What would you write in your decree in defense of that? Anything that come to mind? Let me give you two examples. I'm going to read you two examples. The first one, this is from Campus Life, 1960. These are things that actually happened, okay? John Martyr, when he stepped out of his house into his Chicago home on his birthday recently, he found 2 tons of horse manure piled 8 foot high on his front lawn. The present was compliments of his brother in California. It was the latest in an outlandish gift-giving war that erupted between the two when John sent his sibling one of those insulting birthday cards. He got 50 back. Last year, John received a pet rock that tipped the scale at weighing a whopping 4,000 pounds delivered to his house. He responded with 10 tons of pebbles and a note telling his brother that his pet rock had babies. Over the years, the gifts between the two have included, this reminds me of me, by the way. Over the years, gifts between the two have included a full-grown elephant delivered to one house, 2 busloads of choir boys delivered to one house, which goes on to show it's not just the thought that counts. That's one example. Here's another example, and this example is by Bill Heipel. Y'all know who Bill Heipel is? He's a pastor and a writer, Christian writer. He said, a couple of years ago, a member of my church's vocal team and I were invited by a Christian leader named Yesu to go to southern India. There, we were joined a team of people from various parts of the United States. We were told that God would use us to reach Muslims and Hindus and non-religious peoples for the sake of Jesus Christ. We all felt called by God to go, but none of us knew what to expect when we got there. When we arrived, Yesu met us and invited us to his home. Over the course of the next few days, he told us about his ministry. Yesu's father was a dynamic speaker and a dynamic leader and started the mission in a Hindu-dominated area. One day, a Hindu leader came to Yesu's father and asked for prayer. Eager to pray with him, hoping he would lead him to Christ, he took him into a private room, knelt down with him, closed his eyes, and began to pray. While he was praying, the Hindu leader reached into his robe, pulled out a knife, and stabbed him repeatedly. Yesu, hearing his father's screams, ran to help him. He held him in his arms as blood poured out into the floor of the hut. 3 days later, his father died. On his deathbed, he said to his son, let me stop right there. Think about what you would say to your son or your daughter if this was your last dying words from a man that just slaughtered you, okay? He said to his son, please tell that man that he is forgiven. Care for your mother and carry on this ministry. Do whatever it takes to win people to Jesus Christ. Which do you prefer? Trying to up the other one by sending these outlandish gifts and try to up one, or say, hey, whatever you do to me is fine. It's okay. That's So Esther and Mordecai, the decree that they write, and we'll look at it in a minute, but it allows Jews to retaliate. That if they presume that someone is after them, they presume that someone hates them, they can respond to the presence of that person, and they can murder them, and they can annihilate them. Verse 11. The king's edict granted the Jews in every city the right to assemble and protect themselves. Not a problem. To destroy, kill, and annihilate the armed men of any nationality or province who might attack them or their women, and to plunder the property of their enemies. Now, something has to be done to save their people, but this is also a cautionary story for any of us who's ever been in a situation where we've been hurt or it's been less favorable. How do we respond, and what do we wish for the people that caused the hurt in our life? Anybody want to go first? How do we instantly want to respond? That's terrible, Kevin. But thanks for speaking for all of us. You know. Yeah. 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 Mm. Yeah. Sure. Right. Anybody else got anything? I can tell you that probably over 20 years ago now, Jill, when I've kind of reunited with my cousin's son, Robert Butterini. You know him a little bit. And we talk several times a week. And many years ago when my grandparents died, and the land that we live on was divided out, and two of my aunts and uncles sold 30 acres right in the middle of all of it. It pretty much divided the family, okay? And for so long, and that of course is a subdivision, there are probably 200 houses now. When I would see someone pull off of George Williams Road onto that property that used to be our property, I would think bad thoughts of them people. It ain't their fault. They just bought the house. But there was such an emotional attachment there that there was an anger, there was a resentment. And we had a guy that they built across the street, and talked to him just a few months ago, a new guy named Ryan, nice guy. And Of course, they got these houses on top of each other, and he came walking over, and I was down there working, rebuilding the mailbox and stuff, and he introduced himself, and super nice guy. And I said, hey, our family's been here since the 50s. And he said, oh, I bet you all hate us, don't you? And I said, no, brother. I said, we don't hate you. I said, not at all. Not at all. But then it made me think, though, for all those years, I had a resentment for people just driving up that driveway over there. So I can relate here a little bit. Anybody else before we go on? It does. It does. Especially, and that's a mild hurt. If I remember Gary Christian, who I know, Gary. Shannon was in our youth group at West Park. But all through that trial, the hatred that Gary had, and I can't say I don't blame him. The guy took money to the jail and tried to bail this guy out, and they wouldn't let him. So, but I remember just seeing on TV his face and how it just wrecked his life. From what I hear, Gary's a changed man now, going around churches and preaching the gospel and sharing the testimony, and I will tell you, his daughter was a great young lady. Did not deserve what happened. But guys, we need to understand the buck stops when you stand before Jesus Christ. And we're not the one that, in a situation like that gets to pour out the revenge as much as we want to sometimes. So, back to Esther. So instead of calling off the orders of Haman, Esther and Mordecai, they counter it with their own decree that is just as harsh, pretty much, as the one that he had written. And we're going to look at more of the details in that a little bit in a later session. But those of us who've been on the receiving end of God's grace and God's mercy and God's love and God's intervention, we have to be careful not to try to fight our battles with our own methods. Yes, even to those who hurt us. Instead, the weapons and the warfare is not carnal. It's not against flesh and blood. And we need to understand that. Instead, they're mighty through. Many of us, when salvation came into our lives, we were found in a situation, perhaps, that was painful. Mine, semi-so, experienced death of my mom. I was still trying to get through that. That's when I came to Christ. But we had been hurt, and salvation kind of infuses joy into your life that's been sucked out through what the world gives you, and it infuses joy into our hearts. And salvation can turn the tables on a bad situation, regardless of what the situation is. Much like Esther and Mordecai and the Jews. And this is precisely why we must guard ourselves so that we don't become who God saved us from. We don't want to become like our enemies. And that question that I asked, how would you respond, or how do you respond? Kevin was very honest. I think we like the word revenge. We like to see revenge. We like to get revenge. How much more does this way of handling our enemies call for celebration? It's witnesses of God's blessings and God's salvation in our lives that we will never, it never comes at the expense of other people. God gave us that gift. for that to be shown in all situations. God's salvation is a cause for prayer. In fact, that's the appropriate response. Whenever we sense and we see the activity of God in our lives and in the world turn around the situation, it's a time for celebration, not a time to figure out how to get back at somebody. And that's what Mordecai and Esther kind of, what they were leaning to. Mordecai's whole countenance was changed because he didn't have the burden of Haman consistently trying to plot and hunt him down and kill him. Let's move on, verse 15. When Mordecai left the king's presence, he was wearing royal garments of blue and white, a large crown of gold, and a purple robe of fine linen. And the city of Susa held a joyous celebration for the Jews. It was a time of happiness and joy and gladness and honor in every province and in every city to which the edict of the king came. There was joy and gladness amongst the Jews, with feasting and celebrating. And many people of other nationalities became Jews because fear of the Jews had seized them. Here's something for us to consider. Have we taken a moment to respond relentlessly like Mordecai did to the condition of the people around us when somebody has done something? And when we've responded, when we have done our part and the lives of others have been spared and blessed, when the people around us can, do you know what it looks like when somebody hurt you and they see you celebrating what they're thinking? That's a testimony. That's a witness. I mean, if you can celebrate in a time of pain, if you can celebrate in a time of sorrow, that's something that you have that I don't have. That's what they're saying. You've got something more than what I got. When you can rejoice over what God's done for you, that's a special thing. So we should join in that celebration. And when the providence of God works in our heart and your hands to be successful, not only is there room for our personal celebration, but serving God should also lead to celebration. And, you think about, God tells us to be joyful in all situations. How do you do that? I think we have to understand that joy and happy is not the same thing. There are so many things that we have to be thankful for to God. And have you ever been in a situation where you've seen God intervene and you're like, that had to be God? Where you sit back and you're like, I don't understand how that, you don't even understand how it happened. I've heard people get doctor's reports where cancer's gone or whatever, and the doctor said, we don't understand how that happened. Do we really believe in the intervention of God in today's society? Do you? I do too. I just think that we get so wrapped up in the world around us that we just don't see God working sometimes around us. And that's too busy. But it's hard not to get in that rut. But like I said, there's so many things that we can be thankful for, and we can celebrate the moment when God's providence is our reality. And it also serves as a witness to those who are in search for help. That only the Lord himself can offer, that only he can show the way, that only his hand can come up on it and heal. So we need to celebrate the power of God in our lives. But sometimes we're too busy about trying to get even or get ahead. A life of faith is built on the knowledge that God will provide for us. And I can tell you right now, he has not forgotten us. No matter what our circumstances are, God's providence and provision gives us so many reasons to be joyful. Are you ever just, like maybe you're praying or you're reading something or a song comes on or you're in here and you're singing a song and you're just like, woo! You just like go Baptist-Costal? But then sometimes, we had a guy that would, and I don't know if I agreed or disagreed. His name was Jeremy Kingsley. And I talked to Jeremy not too long ago. But we had him as one of our speakers at a summer camp in South Carolina one year. And we had probably 60, 80 kids there, and they were doing the worship. And Jeremy would stand, you know how Christian camps are. It's a little room, with wooden chairs. But give me your thought on this, okay? I want to tell you what it is. Jeremy would stay behind everybody, and the music, he would get down on his knees and lay flat out on the floor and just worship. And somebody said something to him. I don't know if it was a student or if it was one of the youth leaders. But his response was, they just said, hey, really cool. I love watching you worship. And he said to the tune of, well, let me explain something to you. He said, the reason I do that in the back is because I don't want to distract anybody else. That's why I do it back behind everybody so nobody can see me. Good or bad? In your opinion. I don't know if there's a right answer here. Just a topic for debate. Is it denying an example for the teenagers, or is it, as he's saying, preventing distracting from the teenagers? I think
it's preventing distraction.
Okay. I think it can be both. We're Baptists, we're just kind of like this.
I would say if that's a common practice within the church's worship, then that would be fine. But him
Correct.
recognizing that it was not,
Yeah.
could very well be a distraction, especially for very impressionable young people.
Yeah.
I would say maybe that was a wise choice.
Okay. And I tend to agree. I just think that as we go through this, we are so quick to walk away from opportunities to celebrate and to worship. And sometimes I think that we're afraid for people to see us celebrate and worship. But let me tell you something. If you celebrate and worship during the hardest times and the toughest seasons in your life, like they were going through here, that speaks louder of a testimony than any other time that you worship and celebrate. Somebody has been given the diagnosis of cancer, and they're like, hey, I've got God, I can walk through this thing. That's hard. Somebody's lost a loved one, they're like, hey, why should I not be going through this trial? God's prepared me for this. Those are hard things. When people see that, and they're like, wow, so you're not upset, you're not mad, you're not, maybe so, but it doesn't override my joy. It doesn't override my thankfulness. It doesn't override my praise. Remember, your salvation is not for you alone. Your salvation is for everybody to see. Yeah.
He didn't tell her, he didn't tell her to do that, It's like, why would I leave God at the time when I need it most?
Yeah. And that's not uncommon, though. Yeah. I mean, we got to remember that our situation can bring people to salvation. What we're going through can move more people. As we celebrate our good God through tough times, and people see that, that can lead people to God. Your testimony is a reason to celebrate every single day. Even when the remote control don't work right, when the cable TV is slow, when the kids aren't doing what you ask, when the dog drags mud into the house, when the car battery is dead, your testimony is a reason to celebrate. And guess what? I mean, I've learned through many times something like battery's dead on the car or something. Doggone, I got to take this thing out and take it down to Advanced Auto, where I can walk in and meet somebody that's probably primed to hear the gospel. And I don't think we understand that God sets up divine appointments for us through our struggles sometimes. I've told the story about me and Christopher when we took the boat down to Watts Bar and it wouldn't start. And we pulled it out and brand new battery, but it wouldn't turn over or nothing. So we went and had it tested, and it tested good. And I said, well, let's get a water hose and hook the little clamp on it and go get another battery. And, well, we didn't get another battery because Advanced Auto said, this battery's great. There was a car wash right next door to Advanced Auto, which is right next to Dollar General where we bought the water hose. And we pull into a little stall. There's a lady working there. There's never anybody working at a car wash, one like the one here in Carnes. There's never hardly anybody there working. It's just one of those little bitty car washes. We say, hey, can we hook this water hose up to your spigot? Well, yeah, go ahead. And we hooked it up. Started right up. I said, I don't understand what happened. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. She comes walking out. She said, do y'all know Jesus? And Chris is like, excuse me? She said, do you all know Jesus? And we're like, yes, ma'am. So we do. And she said, my husband started the church last week, and he started with 14 people, and I'm scared to death, and I need somebody to pray with. So we prayed with her right there. There wasn't nothing wrong with that boat. That lady needs somebody to pray with. So God sets up divine appointments that we need to celebrate, and we need to share. We need to share and celebrate what God's doing in our lives with other people. And people see and hear, and they're taken aback, and they're like, wow. That's what we call a testimony. And we've all got it. And I hate it when people say, well, I just don't have a testimony. Yeah, you do too. Yeah, you do. You don't have to have a testimony where you spent 9 years in jail for whatever. God spared you from that. So your testimony is powerful, and it will touch people. So through this, we need to remember our salvation is not just for us. It's for others to see. And Mordecai and Esther, as we read on through here, you're going to see that who they are impacts so many people. And I used to tell our kids all the time, never forget, you're an example at all time, and all places, to all people. You might be a bad example sometimes, but you're always an example. Input, and we'll close out.
Just going back to what I said before, the other side of the coin for me is that as a worship leader with a worship team, it's part of our responsibility, I think, to be examples, though,
Yes.
of heartfelt worship and try to help people get out of maybe that
Rut.
Baptist rut, and understand that it's okay for them to just worship freely,
Yeah.
to express themselves in worship, and let that be a new norm.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's the other, so then as it becomes new norms, then those things are not so weird, maybe.
I remember when I was a kid, I was probably 14 or 15. A guy lived behind me, Gary and Robbie Hood. And they invited me to go to the church. It was a Pentecostal church. I've been in Pentecostal church for my life. And we're sitting there because they were going to have a fish fry afterwards. So that's why I really went to the church. But we're sitting there. I remember Robbie looking over to me, and he said, they're about to pray. And then Gary leaves over and says, it's about to get really good. And they started praying, and they started running around and jumping over the seats and everything. And it's like nothing I've ever seen before in my life. And we have people in our Baptist churches, they see somebody raise their hands, they're like, oh my gosh, what am I supposed to do? Well, you know what? You worship the way that you worship. You know, that's what you do. So, and I love when I see people just kind of just letting everything go.
Well, I think
I
it
love
gives
that.
you like a uplifting, like when y'all are up there and you're playing and you're really getting into it, because you're really
Yeah.
working. That prompts a lot down here.
It
I don't know if
does.
you know that or not. We might not show it, but when I see that up there, I feel that in here. But if it's real calm and collected, don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with that. But it's not as heartfelt. Does it make sense? But I'm saying when you get into it though, it does. It makes a huge difference. Like seeing Susie in the morning, because she usually sits right here in front of me, or she's
Yeah.
right there. And she gets to go and then she starts dancing and she starts worshiping. And to see that, that's just,
I
that don't break you, then something's wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, something's wrong with you.
I love watching Devin just lose himself in the song. I mean, just his face, you know, he just like smiling and I love Sarah when she's singing. Well, she may not notice it not, but she'll just shut her eyes and sing. I love watching Joshua back there in his own world and just doing what he does. That's we need to be contagious. Yes. Oh, okay.
Different interpretation how they do about that. That's fine.
I do too. That's okay.
But they were having a great time. And then I've been to churches where they escort you out.
Yeah.
Because that interrupts.
Yeah.
And that's why there's so many churches, so many ways. You have no excuse. You have that excuse. You can't find a place. We need to go to another place, find a place.
Yeah.
But you touched on a point that really is confusing for a lot of people. There are some of us, through practice or trial, we've learned, you know Jesus Christ is your personal Savior.
Mm-hmm.
It comes easy for us, it's fine. For other people, they ready to be shot. They can't. Okay. We can talk about what?
Well, it's funny you say that. I've been thinking for months, maybe more than that, maybe a year or so, going to Mac's Barber Shop, getting a haircut up here. I always go to Great Clips. But I went to Mac's yesterday. Was it yesterday? Yeah, yes. Jill, according to Jill, he cut it way too short. But anyway,
Actually, I was sitting here, sorry, side note, real quick.
yeah.
It looks really good.
Thank you, Cody.
Sitting there admiring his haircut, thinking, man, if I had enough hair to do that, I'd do it again.
But I'm sitting there in that chair by the main guy, that, what is it, Doug, is that his
Doug.
name? Yeah. Super nice guy, Christian. And I had my sunface shirt on. He said, y'all had some people up here Saturday selling strawberries. I'm like, yeah, we did. He said, you're down there, da-da-da. I said, yeah. I said, where do you go? He said, well, I go North Star. And he said, can I ask you something? I said, sure. He said, I just really struggle with being able to share the gospel. just by walking up and just saying, hey, do you know Christ? Do you know Jesus? Da-da-da. He said, and I've had people kind of look down on me because I'm not good at that. I don't do that the way I do it. And I said, you realize right now that you're kind of sharing the gospel right now. Yes, you don't have to be quoting scripture all the time. Just what you say and what you do and how you act and how you treat people. And that's a simple way to get started to work in people's lives and work in relationships. And he said, I'm just not real good at memorization. I said, it's okay. It's okay. And when you get to a certain point, guess what? The Spirit's going to intercede for you, going to speak through you, going to use you. If your heart and your mind is focused on delivering the gospel to somebody, you're equipped to do that if you have Christ in you. So it was a good conversation. So yeah. Yeah. It is. Yep. Yeah. 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 And we'll close with this. Don't expect unsaved people to act like saved people. Because you'll be disappointed. You'll be disappointed every time.
I heard something cool this morning. The game last night, we lost the basketball game there. But the coach of Kentucky, he said, tomorrow night, we're having a Unite thing. I think they call it Unite Knoxville. I don't know if it's called Unite Lexington.
Yeah.
He says, gonna be here. He said, I want to pack this place. He said, I'm gonna be here. Basketball team's gonna be here, and I expect every one of you to be here.
Wow.
That is really cool.
Yeah. Wow.
Holds like 20-some thousand people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Here expected like 10,000 or something.
That's cool. All right. Keith, will you close us?